First, first.
Hello and welcome to my channel and this week's episode of the Wake Up with Susan podcast. I'm your host, Susan Sutherland. I am an intuitive energy healer and Akashic record reader, and I am sharing an interview with DeeDee Mehren. DeeDee is a holistic nutritionist and a certified culinary nutrition expert, but she doesn't just do nutrition. Her approach is a well-rounded approach, and she shares her 4 pillars of holistic healing and health and wellness. So we're going to talk about great things like detox and middle-aged bodies and metabolism and hormones and grazing and intermittent fasting. And it's a great conversation because right now we are wise. We have lived our years and gained our wisdoms, and we need our bodies to be performing at their peak so we can be really entering this phase of purpose and passion, feeling like we are in the prime of life, because we are. So I hope you enjoyed this interview, and you can check more information on DeeDee in the show notes. Be sure to check out her detox program, and her website has amazing recipes and information on there for you as well. Hi DeeDee, thanks for joining me today.
Hi, thanks for having me, Susan.
And I introduced your other bits. However, I did not mention that you are now a published author.
Yes. You got it. Yay.
I have Sacred Spaces that Colleen did with a collaboration, and you are one of the authors who wrote a chapter.
Yeah, that was a fun experience.
Yeah, so fascinating, and highly recommend this book.
Well, thank you. It was really fun. I've known Colleen now for a few years. She had asked, I had met through a mutual friend, and she did like a part of one of my presentations for my program, a group program like 3 years ago, I think. So we've been kind of keeping in contact, and she floated the idea of the book. And I was like, the first one I was like, I'm not there yet. And then the second one, when it came to fruition, I was ready for volume 3. And so I was dove in, and it was a really fun project. So I'm glad. Yeah.
And you shared your journey through all of this, a health crisis, really, through autoimmune disorders, and how that kind of launched you on this path. Do you want to kind of give us an overview?
Yeah, sure. So I was 30 years old, actually not quite 30 years old, and I ended up giving birth to my beautiful firstborn child 8.5 weeks early. So beautiful baby girl, she was born, and actually for 8.5 weeks early, she was 4.5 pounds, so not so bad. But it kind of set forth this cascade. She was in the NICU for a whole month, but she's great. She's healthy, living, thriving in DC. But, it kind of brought me to my knees after giving birth. And I think the stress of everything, I started having all of these mysterious symptoms. And it really started with like burning in my feet, which was crazy. And I thought it was like a dermatological problem. So I went to see a dermatologist to begin with. And, they gave me a cream, and I was like, okay. But it was really hard for me to wear shoes in the office because my feet would burn so much. But literally, long story short, 9 years later, after, the burning spreading from my feet to my hands, to my face, to my ears, and it's visible too. They swell and they turn red and itch and really uncomfortable. But it also included deep tissue muscle fatigue, just feeling terrible most of the time, not being able to get up. For a while, one weird thing was I couldn't lift my arms above my shoulders. And I went to so many different doctors over the 9 years. And then finally, literally after exasperation, I went to a neurologist and a rheumatologist, and they gave me one simple blood test. And they're like, you have 4 incurable autoimmune diseases. You have lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, Sjogren's syndrome, and severe Raynaud's. And I was like, oh, after everything, I even had a surgery that was fruitless. It was as simple as that. But that's the case with most autoimmune disorders. I mean, usually today they're saying it takes about 5 years on average to get properly diagnosed. But in the past, it was about 9 years on average. Now it's, there's 50 million Americans, 1 in 6, and it's 80% women. So it is very common, but it's still not that understood because the symptoms can be so nebulous and so different from person to person. So the only autoimmune disease I have left right now out of the 4 I was able to cure, 3 of the 4 is Sjogren's syndrome. And most people with Sjogren's syndrome actually experience extremely dry eyes, dry mouth. They're very susceptible to mouth and eye cancers and things like that. I don't really experience any of that. I still have, the only symptom I have left is peripheral neuropathy, where my hands and feet swell, turn red, and itch and burn. And it's just neuropathy. So everybody is different. Everybody's experience is different, but it was a 9-year journey. And that's kind of what led me to here, because before that, I was an advertising executive, and I didn't realize that my lifestyle, I always thought I was a healthy person. My lifestyle was setting me up to kind of topple and, have this happen. Now that I understand, looking back, I understand the cascade of events, but while I was in it, I had no clue.
Right. And so you went to all of these doctors, you had surgery. How did you heal 3 out of 4 of your autoimmune diseases?
So it kind of, I think everybody, has that aha moment. And it was, I was a long distance marathon runner. And see, this is what I thought was healthy, right? And I was running in the Chicago Marathon. And right before the Chicago Marathon, I experienced, about a month and a half before, I experienced a severe bout of pneumonia, which I had had 5 serious bouts of pneumonia as part of this whole thing in 2 years with pleurisy. So meaning I was hospitalized for like a lung lining issue. And it was pretty severe, but I healed up and I ended up running Chicago. I probably shouldn't have, and qualifying for Boston. So, I was that kind of person where perfectionism, and I had to do everything and I had to go full bore into everything. But after that, I just, went to my doctor. I had made an appointment with my doctor. And I said, what am I doing wrong? Is there something I am doing? And he would always say, no, this is just who you are. This is these are incurable. Here's another pill bottle. And I came home super frustrated, and I Googled, because as I told you, one of my symptoms was lifting my arms above my shoulders. And I Googled, can't lift arms above shoulders. And, then this story came up of Venus Williams, who's a tennis player. I think you're a tennis player as well, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm a tennis player. And it was her story with Sjogren's syndrome and how she couldn't lift her arms and had to drop out of the US Open. And I was like, hold on. I hadn't ever heard of this. When you tell people you can't lift your arms above your shoulders, first of all, they don't really believe you. It's just such a weird thing. But I looked into her story, and she was seeing a nutritionist. And this nutritionist had her go vegan and gluten-free. And I had been vegan in my 20s, and I was like, oh, that didn't really work for me. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to try gluten-free. And this was, almost 15 years ago now. And I was like, I'm going to try going gluten-free, which was completely out of my realm of awareness, because I was a long distance athlete. So I lived on like bagels, pasta, carbs, anything to quick energy, right? So, but literally the next day I went gluten-free. And it was a lot harder back then. And I started, like 2 weeks later, I felt a lot better. And I would say maybe like 50%. And I could lift my arms up. I was like, what happened? The fatigue had kind of diminished. And so that was the beginning of my journey of thinking, wow, I can do something to control the outcome. Whereas in the past, I had been totally giving away my power to the physicians. Oh, you need surgery? Okay. Oh, take this pill? Okay. I didn't see that I had any power in this situation. So I started to kind of examine what I was doing, and realizing that, the food had gotten me about, just even the elimination of gluten. Turns out I'm probably celiac disease as well, but I never was tested. And I've been gluten-free for 15 years almost. So, but it's, so that was the start. And I was really intrigued with just taking control. And so the more research I did led me to quit my job. My husband got a job in Canada as an expat. I went there with him and my 3 young children. And I couldn't work. So I ended up going back to nutrition school while I was in Canada at the Institute of Holistic Nutrition. And I loved it. I soaked everything up as a sponge. It was found my tribe. I found the people I loved, starting every day with meditation and mantra. And we would do massage trains and, talk healing. And it was just a beautiful place to be. And so that was the starting of my journey. And that was back in 2013.
And how interesting that you didn't want to go to Canada because it was so cold, but had you moved anywhere in the US, you would have been able to work and would have just perpetuated this instead of completely shifting and going back to studying.
Yeah, and they didn't really have any schools like that in the US. They have health coaching certifications, not nearly as comprehensive and as well done as I would say the IHN program is. Now I think they do offer an online program, but it was pretty intense for a couple years, going in person to classes, which is what I loved, taking chemistry and anatomy and physiology and psychology of disease and I just actually loved the courses and really fell in love with it, but I didn't ever really intend to make it a business. It was all just for myself, my healing journey and that of my mother, who had a hereditary lung condition that she was battling. So it was all just to heal my family. But then, things happen for a reason.
Things happen and people say, oh, how did you do that? Can you teach me? Right?
That's exactly what started happening.
Right. So what I love about your approach and your website and your newsletter is it's not just diet focused. It is very much about a well-rounded, holistic approach, because I think, like you were saying, I'm a runner. Of course, I'm healthy.
Yeah.
We feel like if we're doing one thing really well, and I think a lot of times spiritual people can kind of ignore their body or not take care of it in such a way because we become so much about the spirit that we do not nourish our vessel the way we need to. And so I really like that you make it where it's all components of wellness.
Absolutely. My healing has been anything but just nutrition. That is for sure. It was the start, I would say. But my approach has always been, and I wrote this down when I was thinking, back in 2017, I remember sketching out this, what looked like a table at the time. And it was, my 4 pillars. It was nutrition, movement, stress, and sleep. And then I always had underlying this community and purpose component. And then I flipped it upside down. So it was like a tabletop. And so I kept thinking, if any one of those components fall down, like, as you said, like, you could be eating clean and green, as I say, and like the most beautiful, organic, whole food, nutrient dense diets. But if you're, running yourself to the ground or not sleeping, you're going to fall apart. And mine was definitely, I was obviously eating the wrong thing from my body. Gluten was not the right thing for my body. But more so, my healing journey has been with the stress component, because when I look back, and my story started, as I said, with that early birth of my child, I know now what happened. And no one still to this day has ever told me this, but I remember them going in and saying, well, for your next 2 pregnancies, you're going to have to do, weekly progesterone shots because you didn't have enough progesterone to hold the baby in. And there's a saying in holistic health, when progesterone when cortisol, which is your stress hormone, goes high, progesterone goes shy. So meaning when you are stressed, you have 0 progesterone. It flatlines, and progesterone is absolutely needed to hold a pregnancy in. So I was in this state where I was probably over exercising. I was not sleeping. I was an insomniac. I would only sleep a few hours a night. And I was working 60-hour work weeks. And that was just my type A personality. I've kind of always had that tendency. And that's what I've had to learn more so than anything, is to kind of view myself when I'm getting into that type A mindset of more is no, maybe, we need to stop and we need to reflect and we need to meditate and we need to journal about this and think about what you're doing, because that's just where I feel like I still am not, sometimes in control of my health, because I'll let that stress wheel go a little bit too long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's kind of culturally what we have here, and we keep compounding it, where even when moms might back out of the workplace, then they pile 3 sports per child and, trying to manage a schedule. And I feel like we have gotten so used to things have to be chaotic to where when they're not, it's like, well, how can I fix that and make it more stressful? How can I make my life more crazy? Because that's what feels normal to me. We don't know how to be at rest.
Yep. Yeah. It's very much an issue. And I think that the prevalence of autoimmune disease is reflecting that. I think there's a lot of environmental triggers, but I do think because it's 80% women, there's something to that. Women do hold their stress a little bit differently. Mm-hmm. There's the estrogen component as well, but I do think the stress and how we metabolize and process stress is very much a big part of it.
So I was having a conversation with some ladies the other day, and 2 of them were like, we hit a certain age and then there's unexpected weight gain. They're doing all of the same things, even, being more mindful to get exercise, to do all of these things, and the pounds just add up. What's going on with that?
Well, the thing that's really hard there is that our metabolism doesn't really change all that much. Actually, it's very minimal, because I hear that, and I, as a 53-year-old woman, and I see the women that I work with, so I'm not calling anyone out on it. But what is typically happening there is that, in my mindset, is that the hormonal shift and our decline in estrogen is protective on so many levels. But with that, we start getting, we start getting insomnia because we're not sleeping well, because our body temperature might rise at night. So we're having night sweats or hot flashes. So we're not getting any sleep or any quality sleep. We're unfortunately, when you're sleep deprived, you're eating more and the more of the wrong thing the next day. It's usually about an average of 300 to 400 additional calories when you're sleep deprived the next day. And a lot of the things that we're doing that we used to do, like maybe the chronic cardio, just aren't working for us. So that is, I think it's more that we're not feeling well. And so we're maybe doing the wrong thing. We'll say, okay, I'm going to go run it off the next day. So you'll go for a run, but that's putting your body in maybe even more of a cortisol stress state. And when your cortisol is high, which is the stress hormone, your blood sugar goes high and you hold on to weight, because cortisol is a fat storage hormone. So I think, we're kind of punishing ourselves and going about it a little bit the wrong way, when sometimes maybe we do need to just, instead of like pushing ourselves harder the next day, is take a nap or meditate and journal on why we're not feeling so good and try and address that issue.
Oh my gosh, doesn't that sound better than a run, you guys?
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely, and I have to take that advice myself. I used to be, as I said, a big time runner. I don't really run anymore, but I still exercise every day. I do believe that we need to move our bodies every single day to feel good in our body. So a lot of times for me, that is like weightlifting and then a walk or something like that. I mean, we do have to move and we have to build that, especially I've noticed when you hit that 45 age, maybe 40, building that lean muscle mass, because you're building that what's called your metabolic sink. So the more muscle mass you have on you, the more glucose you're going to be able to store and burn. It's metabolically very active tissue. So we're going to want to have as much muscle mass on us for that reason. Also, you're going to increase your basal metabolic rate with the more muscle mass you have. And so that basal metabolic rate is just what you burn at rest. So like I'm a petite person, I'm 5'4". I've never been a big bone person. And so my basal metabolic rate is only about 1,200 calories a day. So when I wake up and I look at my Oura Ring metrics, if I did nothing all day, I would, to be, energy balanced, I'd have to eat about 1,200 calories, which I eat about 2,000, maybe 2,200 a day. But that's because I have a lot. I lift weights 2 or 3 times a week. Every day, I'm getting at least 10,000 steps. I do my walking treadmill because I live in Chicago during the winter. But every day, I'm trying to aim for about, my active calories to get me around to that 2,000 mark, so I can be at energy balance by eating about 2,000 calories, which is where I feel good and strong and healthy. Now, if I were getting up and sitting in front of a computer all day, I would be at that 1,200 calorie mark, and that's
hard to do.
That's hard to do. It's not fun. I mean, I'd much rather be like moving throughout the day and eating delicious food. But because I also have this metabolic sink, as I said, building up this lean muscle, I burn more at rest too. So I'm burning more overnight. I'm burning more just sitting here talking to you. But I definitely am trying to get in a lot of NEAT, which is called non-exercise activity thermogenesis, during the day. So that's what, these women that are struggling, definitely things change. And I think it's more that you don't feel good. And so you start changing your behaviors and maybe you don't notice it as much. But again, when you're having night sweats and hot flashes, and menopause, perimenopause can cause fatigue in general and aches and pains. There's so many different things that it can cause. You're not feeling good, so you're not doing maybe the same things that you used to do, and you're not as energetic. And then you're maybe making the wrong choices in food because you don't even know. Maybe that, you used to be vegan and vegetarian and you're still eating that. You're not getting your protein in like you should be, because that's going to help you build that muscle mass. So that's, what the science is saying, that if you can really try and, address the symptomology of menopause. And for some, I haven't started hormone therapy, but I'm researching it every single day almost. And I do plan on starting it when I need to.
Should we go get like a hormone panel done?
Well, during perimenopause, it's really tricky. I did. And the one I recommend is called the Dutch test. So, but just know that during perimenopause, you're all over the board. I mean, so it's really hard to pin down, and you can't really pin down like, oh, am I almost at menopause? As it started. I mean, you can notice changes in your cycle and changes in your symptomology. So you kind of know, but a hormone test is really tricky at this time because your hormones are all over the board. So I would rely more on symptoms. It's nice to know, like I always say, like for like a Dutch test. It's nice to know because it's nice to know how your different hormones are metabolized. There's, metabolite pathways. So you get a good physician that can help you understand that and optimize it. And then maybe start, like I'm considering starting low dose progesterone and estradiol just because like I've noticed that my body temperature is raising a little bit at night. I have no other symptoms of menopause yet. But I do notice that when I have this Oura ring on, especially during the second half of my cycle, that my body temperature goes up about a degree every night. And that's pretty significant. And it causes me not to sleep as well. So, I'm starting to, and progesterone is really going to help you get that better sleep, especially in that second half of the cycle. So that's why I'm considering it at this time.
Okay. And what are other symptoms that somebody might experience that would say, hey, your hormones are definitely out of whack?
Well, I would say that, the most common one people are complaining about is the night sweats and the hot flashes, but just fatigue in general, and joint pain is a huge one. Frozen shoulder is, is another one, maybe, and then as you get older, you're worried about brittle bones, and estrogen is very heart protective. So that's why HRT can help with heart issues. But, there's a lot of things. It's just, if you feel like you're off, it could be just that loss of estrogen because estrogen is so protective.
Okay. Interesting. Now, as far as I know, you went with protein forward there. And I know it's important. I understand. And I used to log all my meals in MyFitnessPal and did 40-30-30, like 40% carbs, 30 fat, 30 protein. And I was really diligent. And now I don't do that as much. I'm probably not getting that amount of protein.
Yeah.
If I'm being honest. And I know it's really important. This is the little hang up I have right now is you read an article that says the American Heart Association accepted $20 million to say that this was right. Like, how do we trust anything? How do we trust information that's out there that says I should make all of these modifications because they said so? Like, who's to say they didn't just take a bunch of money?
Yeah, well, I don't trust the American Heart Association, to be honest. That is what I would not trust. There's a great website called PubMed. It might be a little sciencey for most, but it is the published research from medical journals and everything. And that's where I do a lot of my research from. So, and again, it's very sciencey, so some of it's difficult to interpret. But I do say to people that, nutrition, it can be very confusing when you listen to all the noise, but really it is fairly simple in terms of, I always tell people, don't major in the minors. Like, if you're not there in terms of, getting just the right nutrition, the right movement, the right stress, just stick to the basics. Eat 80 to 90% real food, just food without, a barcode or bag. Because if you're just eating real food, you're going to get pretty close to your goals. And it's very simple. So as far as like protein and everything goes, I would say there's definitely experts that I've always felt that I trusted, that I usually go to them as, the resources. And I'm a huge believer in what's called an N of 1 experiment. So everyone is different, right? So you and I may thrive on very different things. Right. So yes, start with the basics, eating real food, trying and getting all your food groups and, prioritizing vegetables. But you might not need as much protein as I do. Or you might not need as much fiber as I do, but I definitely, in terms of where I'm at right now with lifting weights, several times a week and being active to try and keep muscle mass on me, I need to hit that probably 100, 110 grams a day to do that. And then I also have a fiber goal every day of 35 grams. I find it relatively simple because I eat the similar things every single day. I know you're supposed to get more varied, but I still get close to 30 plants in a week. But, every morning, my morning consists of some kind of green smoothie. I would say six or almost 7 days a week. Some days, I'll go out to brunch with family and I'll have like an egg dish or something. But for the most part, it's a big green smoothie with, and I know protein powders can be controversial, but it has 25 grams of protein in it. And I've done my research to find the cleanest protein powder that I can. And I use that. And then by the time I get my chia and my flax and maybe some nut butter or something in there, I'm usually with my morning smoothie at about 35 grams of protein. Then for lunch, every day for lunch, I'm usually having, today I had, and this is what I eat every Monday, is a sheet pan roast, tons of different variety of vegetables. So this is how I'm getting my variety. And every, a couple days, it'll be different. And then I'll save it for the next couple days. But today it was cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and sweet potato. So I sheet pan roast that, and then I did, a tofu because I don't eat meat on Mondays. It's just, I've done that for years. So I did tofu with some broccoli sprouts and some cilantro for added detox. Tonight I am testing one of my detox soups for my upcoming program. So I'm making that. So today's going to be a little lower protein diet because my lunch probably had I had a side of Greek yogurt on it. So that right there is 20 grams. So 20 grams plus another for the tofu would be about 8. So 28 plus 35. And then tonight with the soup, it's going to be, my only protein source will be hemp seed. So I'll probably get to about 90. And
Okay.
I'm not obsessive. Like, that's
Okay.
great. Yeah. I'm never going to be dogmatic about anything. And especially I think it's good some days to kind of vary your nutrition. But most days that's kind of my pattern is I'll have a smoothie that's about 35 grams. I'll have a bowl, like tomorrow will probably be eggs or some kind of other protein source. And then at dinner, it's usually a protein of fish or a veggie on the side. And by the time I'm done with a Greek yogurt somewhere in between, it is about 100 to 110 grams of protein every day. And so that's kind of an easy way for me to know without having to do the work of tracking. But I also have done this work for 8 years, so I'm pretty well aware of what things have in them.
Right. I am probably not going to go to the website and read the mid journals because that is the benefit of having people like you to follow on social. Is that you're doing that.
Yeah,
But what is the protein powder that you found to be the cleanest?
Well, right now I rotate a ton of them.
Okay.
But right now I'm using what's called Paleo Pro for most days. And then when I lift weights, I do a clean whey protein, which you have to be very careful because like if you go to a GNC and pick a whey protein, like a Jock's whey protein off the shelf, they're going to be full of fillers and just from crap sources. So I use the brand Levels right now. It's grass-fed, grass-finished whey protein. There's really nothing else in it except for I think maybe a little bit of monk fruit or stevia, one of the two that I'm not concerned with sweeteners. But it's very simple ingredients, and that's what you should be looking for. You really don't need any fillers in a protein powder. You want just the source of protein. And most of them, except if they're unflavored, have a little bit of sweetener in them. The concern where protein powders have gotten a bad rap and this rightfully so, is a lot of the plant-based, especially protein powders, because they're such highly concentrated forms of protein, like usually pea protein or rice protein, that they can contain a ton of heavy metals. Because what happens is plants soak things up from the ground, right? And our ground is not how it used to be. It's full of metals. And so they'll soak that up, the plant, and then you concentrate it. So it's an extra amount of toxicity in that protein powder. So that's why for the most part, I tell people I do avoid plant protein powders and go with either like a paleo version or a bone broth version, or I just started doing whey protein again. Because before, when I first started this journey, I looked at whey protein powders and they were made with such crap. But now there's a lot of really better versions. And if you are not dairy sensitive, most people can tolerate a whey. Sometimes if you're dairy sensitive, because casein and whey are the two proteins in dairy, you would need to be careful. Most people are dairy sensitive because they can't handle the lactose, but sometimes it is the protein. So I always say just buy a really good source and then be cautious if you are dairy sensitive. But that's why protein powders have been getting such a bad rap, especially the chocolate, because chocolate you're also adding, unfortunately, the cacao plant concentrate, which sometimes has metals in it as well.
Okay. I had to use a Zetox dropper for a little while. I was getting headaches and it was from the heavy metals.
Metals.
But I do know, like leading up to Peru, the ayahuasca diet, whatever they told me to do, I made it for the whole month of January. Like even if it's cut it out for the last week, it was like, except for caffeine, which I cut out maybe a week and a half in advance and haven't gone back. But it was the best I've felt in so long, where you're just eating whole foods. You're not eating added sugar. You're not having caffeine. I didn't drink before, but just not having all of those things in my body just felt amazing. So I understand how they all work together. Then I have more energy, and then you do more and you sleep better, and it all just works together so nicely. And when I came home, I think Mark thought that it would be like, back to whatever I was doing before, but why would I want to compromise this? Like it feels really good.
Yeah. It's usually how people come out of my detox saying as well. I always tell them I'd probably, I think for that 5 days of really cleansing and rejuvenating, is fantastic. And I think for some people, because they ask, can I do this the next week? I say, absolutely do it the next week. I said, eventually you're going to want to, if you resume like normal intense, like weightlifting or anything, you're going to want to up your protein a little bit. But I think, in general, it's such a great way. And we all feel so much better when we're doing that you're right. Like that's what I usually hear back from people is, I am sleeping so much better. And then they have more energy. And it's such a cycle that they don't want to stop because they're feeling so good. And once you've made that mind body connection, that's what makes the difference is like you said, you don't want to go back. There's some people that just never get there in terms of like, they'll do it and then they'll go back to their old ways and like, I'm feeling crap, but they still haven't connected like the dots,
But when you start focusing on what you're gaining, not what you're giving up.
Absolutely.
It is so much easier. So when is the detox happening? When is that program?
I do that the week. It always starts the day after Mother's Day.
Okay.
So it is that May 12th, somewhere around there. I do it twice a year. It's a 5-day whole food detox program. And, it's all real food. It's soup, smoothies, juices, elixirs. I do recommend some supplements. Nothing is required at all, but it's all real food. And then I provide after that, because as you said, like when you come off of something like that, you usually feel so good, you want to continue it. I provide a month-long meal plan that goes with it. So it's meant to like, you do it for 5 days of the detox, and then you transition to a clean, whole food, nutrient dense diet. And then I do have people that, especially my, I can't say, I'm treat, cure, or heal anything, but I do recommend people that have been through things like chemotherapy or whatever to do it 3 months in a row. So to do the detox 5 days, month 1, 5 days, month 2, 5 days, month 3 at a minimum. If you're good to do it every month for 12 months, fantastic. There is definitely not any harm, and it's all just real food. And with very specific, like every ingredient, I try and have a purpose for it being there. You know what I mean? It's not just filler ingredients. Everything has its reason, whether it's a bitter food for digestion or an anti-inflammatory food like turmeric or ginger for inflammation. I mean, every food kind of plays a role in that program. And then I do daily education alongside it. So I have daily videos, daily tutorials on things that, can aid in detoxification. And as you said, like metals, my first experience with detoxing was when I was back in nutrition school in Canada in probably 2014. I went into a holistic practitioner and had my metals tested, and I was super high in mercury because I had amalgam fillings. And those mercury fillings that we got when we were little kids. And I was so high in mercury, and she gave me a powder to detox. And I was so toxic that I took one drink of it. I went out shopping. I threw up all over the grocery store. It was horrific. That was my first detox experience.
Oh my gosh.
I've learned quickly that detoxification, you need, first of all, to have your channels of elimination open. So you need to make sure that you're eliminating every day, that you're doing things to eliminate like sauna, walking, yoga, your bowels need to be regular, all to aid in detoxification. And sometimes when it's too much too soon, that's called a Herxheimer reaction. That's exactly what I had. I was too toxic. And I took this strong formula, which I didn't know, it wasn't a whole foods, it was a concentrated powder. And I took it, and it was way too much for my body. And my body just was like, nope, not ready for that. I'm just going to push it all out. And it was right in the middle of a grocery store. So it was horrific. So that's how I learned the hard way. And ever since then, I got really kind of into the science of detoxification. And that's when I that was actually my first program coming out of school, because my friends were sitting around a pool one day and said, during the summer, and said, we've had too much fun in the summer. Can you create a detox program? And I said, yep, game on.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Yeah. Coming out of holidays too. I feel like now we're getting to the point where people's January momentum wanes.
Oh, absolutely.
And we're still in the thick of winter in some places, and it's like hard to get the activity and the motivation, but you don't have that January, like, I'm new year, new me mentality. So how do you create, first of all, how do you create the self-love to know you deserve good food and good activity? But how do you inspire people to be disciplined to make these daily choices?
Well, I think you nailed it. It's a mindset. So it isn't about, I love the food I eat. It is an abundance mindset. It is not deprivation at all. Like for me to choose like what I had for lunch over a burger and fries, I wouldn't even be, and maybe because I've been doing it so long, but I know how meal one's going to make me feel. The tofu roasted veggie with broccoli sprouts and cilantro and hot sauce. Like I know I'm going to come out of there being ready to talk to you, clear-minded, feeling energized. I wouldn't even like, I don't miss that burger and fries. Like, do I, like, I know that would make me feel like I had this just bomb in my gut and feel so heavy. So I always tell people it is a matter of shifting your thinking and your mindset into abundance versus deprivation. This way of living is, it is something like I get to go for a walk outside. I really don't love living in where I do a couple months of the year because it is really hard for me to stay inside. I get so excited when the sun's out and it's actually 40 degrees now. I'm like, woohoo, let's go. And then when I go to sleep, I mean, my friends do tease me. I said, there's a joke in my family that anytime I get an invitation like past 8:30, I'm like, are those people on cocaine?
What are they doing?
What are they doing?
What class are they leading?
I know. So my kids, because my kids are older, so I can make jokes like that. They're like, anytime I'm like, oh, so-and-so invited me out to dinner at 8 p.m. They're like, it's okay, Mom, they're on coke. I'm like, all right.
Right. I texted Mark that the ayahuasca ceremony started at 8 p.m. and they were like, do they know you go to bed at 9:30?
I know. Yeah. My husband and I are both the same. We're both in bed by 9:30. So, it's just because I know that I love a quiet morning. I love ritual. I love journaling in the morning. I love staring out at the, sky. And again, so for me, it is 100% a mindset way of being, and it doesn't feel hard to me. Yeah. I like being able to move my body. I like being able to, whereas in the past, when I started meditating, it was kind of torturous for a couple minutes at a time because my mind was so busy. I have now embraced that some days my mind is just going to be all over the board. And you know what? That's okay because it's still, I still watch it and I'll be like, wow, my mind is just insane today.
Right. Let me discard
and it's not a failure. Yeah, it's not a failure. And I still crave it now every day. If I can get my, I always try and get at least 20, but some days if I'm like, oh man, if I can get an hour in, I will be so happy. So yeah, I mean, I think that's what it comes down to is just making that mind-body connection and just realizing how grateful you are when you feel good in your body, because I've felt otherwise, right? I still have some symptoms from Sjogren's syndrome and, I try and kind of detach from them but also like, oh, what did I maybe do that kind of maybe exacerbate it? Was my stress levels today just a little bit too much? Or, did I not sleep as well the night before? But it is just an entire mindset.
Yeah. And like everything you said was bringing awareness to it. We have got to get off autopilot, because if you start having those conversations with yourself and not just like going to the pantry and grabbing something, but saying, what does my body need? Or how does this make me feel? And then circling back, like I just had this. Yeah. How am I feeling? What are my energy levels like? And bringing awareness to it so that we are using food to fuel the life we want and not just, this autopilot grabbing stuff, having, the same thing all the time. Or, well, nothing wrong with that if it's a good choice, right?
Yeah.
But where we just, eat dinner because we have to eat dinner and not because we are trying to nourish ourselves.
Yes. Food is information to our cells, and those cells either live or die with the choices we're making with our fork a lot of the time. So it's really simple. And I'm not saying I'm perfect. By God, and actually my daughter was so funny last week when the book came out and it hit that Amazon #1, like in a couple categories. She's like, let's go have a gluten-free pizza. And and so we went to her favorite place, and she's 17. I never say anything. She gets what she wants. She orders a pizza and I got a salmon salad. She's like, don't you want to like celebrate with a pizza? I'm like, no, I really am craving a salmon salad. So, this is what my body wants right now. I said, but occasionally I will choose a gluten-free pizza. I'm not saying never, and I don't think that's wrong. And I don't torture myself about, I have a total sweet tooth. So I always have healthy alternative sweets in my refrigerator that I've made, usually like a healthy peanut butter cup. Something like that. I've seen
your reels, and I know I'm going back and I'm going to give a couple of those a try. I'm not a baker. I'm not really a cook, but I sometimes can follow. The reason I don't cook desserts most of the time is because you have to be more diligent with your order. And
I am not. Okay. I always tease people because they're like, you're such a, because I, do this 30-day program that's tons of recipes. I'm like, I'm a messy chef. If you look at the recipes, they're all simple for a reason. I don't do complicated. And for baking, I do things that have leeway and give. And usually simple ingredients because, that's how I roll. But, and also I'm a sweet tooth. So when I do get that craving, I love that I can just go and have something that I will satisfy the craving without making me feel terrible.
Yes.
In the end.
Okay. I have one thing to tell you, that you posted one video before I left on my trip, and I started watching it and it triggered the hell out of me. So I had to turn it off.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And then I was like, I'll deal with that later. I'm going to deal with that later. So we're going to deal with it right now.
Good.
I started watching, and you told me on Instagram that I should not be grazing.
Oh,
And I am a grazer. And so I turned it off, and I was like, I'm sure she has great information right now, but I can't receive this. And I went on my trip, and it's really interesting because we sat down for breakfast and had like a proper spread of a breakfast. And then we sat down for lunch and had a proper lunch. And then a lot of times we didn't have dinner because we were having ayahuasca. And I was like, oh, it turns out I actually can go from meal to meal if I had something that was more substantial. Than I've been having. So maybe I saw it right before I proved that I could do it. But since I haven't found that video again, tell me why. Why can't I graze?
And I think you're obviously not alone. That is huge. I forget what the status of the average American has like 14 different eating events a day. I mean, so it's like, you are not alone. It is the norm. We have been so indoctrinated into thinking snacking all the time is right to keep our, like it used to be, we got to keep our energy up. So we need a snack.
Keep your metabolism going.
Keeping the metabolism going. That was the thought for such a long time. And nutrition is nebulous and changing and all of that. But you nailed it when you said, when you eat properly, you don't need it. Now, I'm not to say like there's certain times, I usually eat just 3 meals, but during the second half of my cycle, I am extra hungry. So I usually do need like a 4 p.m. snack. I usually make it like a bulletproof latte is what my way of handling that is. But for the most part, when you're having enough protein and fiber at each meal and enough calories, you're satiated. And when you're not spiking your blood sugar, like the average American, so say you even have just like that bowl of oatmeal that everyone, might think is healthy. Well, you're going to spike your blood sugar so much if you're not adding a ton of protein and fat to it, that when blood sugar spikes, it comes down even harder. And that's going to make you even hungrier for that 10 a.m. snack. So if you had breakfast at like 7, you're going to be starving by 10. And then the whole cycle is an up and a down because you're having that, maybe like grabbing an extra coffee and a bagel for lunch. And, it's this whole cycle. Whereas if you're eating, like you sit down and have, for breakfast, some, my green smoothies are very dense. I mean, they're probably typically about 400, 500 calories. So they're pretty dense. I usually make it into a smoothie bowl. So I eat, or also I'm eating eggs and veggies with avocado. You can go like 4 or 5 hours without even really thinking of food if you eat that way. And so it is about building the nutritious meals and not thinking of them as snacks. And I think a lot of women tend to undereat, thinking like, I'm going to not eat so much at lunch. And then they're starving like 2 hours later. So they just end up grazing, right? But there's also science behind why you want to leave time in between meals is because your body does its repair work when there's no food. It's working on digesting. So you have something called autophagy happening where your cells that are maybe not the healthiest are dying off and your body is clearing them. Our cells are born and die every day. And when we're not eating for that period of time is when that can happen. That's one of the processes that happen. And also I referenced the other main reason why you don't want to be eating all the time is because every time you eat, if there's even a little bit of carbohydrate, your insulin is going to spike. So you have this little blood sugar kind of bump every single time you eat for the most part. And you're creating this kind of process where, insulin goes up, then it comes down and you're hungry again and you're going on this blood sugar roller coaster. And that's why we have the issue of so many people in the US having prediabetes or diabetes. And only, now they're saying only like 92% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy. So only about 8% are metabolically healthy. It's because of this insulin roller coaster most of us are living on. The statistics are pretty alarming as far as that's concerned. So we want to make sure that we're, eating satiating meals, eating in a calm atmosphere. Like for my lunch, I always make sure to put my phone away. I'm not going to sit and look at my phone and, screen Instagram or something while I'm eating because I'm bound to, as you said, find something that's going to trigger me and release a stress hormone, which is going to raise my blood sugar even more. But, defined meal times, And not saying you can never have a snack, especially like if you've done an intense workout and for a woman, you're in the second half of your cycle, you probably are going to be a little bit hungrier, and you actually need about 300 more calories during that time, like in a late luteal cycle. So, honor that, don't ignore it, and don't starve yourself. But also you just will find you're not thinking of food that often if you're eating the right way.
Let's see. Okay, one other personal question since I have you here. I could practically be a fruitarian. Yeah. And I know from watching your, talking about a sweet potato spiking your blood sugar, I'm like, oh my God, if she could see the amount of fruit I'm eating, I'm sure it's a problem. I do try to grab a handful of or some nuts
have
or
some kind of protein
with it.
Yep.
But is that okay to be eating?
This is where I think the N of 1 experiment could come into play for you. Yeah. So I would recommend that at any point in your life, at one point, you get a continuous glucose monitor. No matter if you're diabetic or not, you can buy them non-diabetic, and we're not taking them for the diabetics. That's why I got that comment. There's plenty to go around. There's actually companies that are, targeting them for people that are not diabetic, just to understand blood sugar, because we're all different. Like sweet potato spikes my blood sugar. It's one of my favorite foods. So I always now when I do it, I just do a few sweet potatoes and more roasted vegetables. You still eat it, but I eat it in a different way than I used to. And everyone is different. Some people, banana might spike their blood sugar horribly. It doesn't really spike mine at all. Okay. So it is that knowing of how you interact. And there's also ways to mitigate that. So what I typically say is if you eat a food and watch how you feel afterwards. If your heart kind of races and you don't feel so good, it's probably because you had a blood sugar spike.
Okay.
So if you're
amazing with fruit.
So if you're feeling good and it's not making you hungry all the time, you're probably fine. Test it to make sure is what I would recommend. But berries are usually a very safe bet. Any kind of berry is typically not going to spike your blood sugar. People have a little bit of more problems with bananas or tropical fruits spiking your blood sugar. But then I have weird one, like chickpeas spike my blood sugar like crazy too. And they're not really supposed to because they have a ton of fiber in them. But again, everyone is different. So doing that N of 1 experiment to kind of ease your mind. And this is only also if maybe you've had a blood panel and you've seen that your fasting glucose. So there's some key markers in terms of metabolic health. The 5 that they actually test for metabolic health is your hip to weight ratio, right? If you have a lot of visceral fat, belly fat, your blood pressure, your triglycerides, your cholesterol, and your fasting glucose. So those are the 5 measures to test metabolic health. The ones I think they're neglecting in terms of the actual numbers are what's called your A1C, your blood sugar over 3 months, and your fasting insulin. So if you have any kind of problems with those numbers, and that's where you might want to see a nutritionist or somebody to help you out, is to help kind of address that scenario and try and get those numbers in check. So, that's one of my goals, because I know that this state of prediabetes and diabetes is not just relating to diabetes, it's relating to a lot of chronic illness. They call Alzheimer's now the type 3 diabetes because it's so related to blood sugar. So that's what I want people to think of when you're eating something and maybe you're noticing that you're fatigued afterwards. You're needing a nap. You're kind of really going up, and then it gives you a ton of energy. So maybe you're like, oh God, I feel great. But then, a half hour later, you're like, I need a nap. So that's just a consideration, is to make sure you're looking at your blood work, reviewing the metrics for what's called metabolic health. And if you have any issues, to test it with maybe a continuous glucose monitor for a few weeks. Again, there's a lot of private companies out there now doing that kind of work that I think it's worthwhile for almost everyone to do once or twice to kind of understand how their own physiology works.
Okay, awesome. And what is your comment on intermittent fasting? Should we be cutting it off at 7 and giving ourselves 12 hours? Is that the break we need?
Well, I think everyone can pretty much go 12 hours. I think that's a basic starting point, is again, the not eating and I would say 12 hours with trying to leave at least 2 to 3 hours at night before you go to bed, because you're going to get a much better night's sleep if you don't go to sleep with after having just eaten. So I'm not dogmatic about intermittent fasting at all. I do feel that when you're hormonally very stable, like postmenopausal women can usually rock a metabolic fast, an intermittent fast quite well. Men can definitely typically intermittent fast, like the best of them. I know my husband is one of those people. When you're a hormonally kind of up and down perimenopausal woman, I would say listen to your body. For years, I was intermittent fasting I would eat between 10 and 6 generally. And then my exception is usually the 2 weeks again before my cycle because I get hungrier. I might eat breakfast a little bit sooner. Now, I would say I usually go about 14 hours instead of 16 hours. So I usually am eating between 9 and 6, like I'll have breakfast around 9 o'clock and I try and have dinner around 6 p.m. And then I say, get out of the kitchen, the kitchen is closed for the night. Like I'll turn off the lights. I'll go far away from the kitchen. I have never really fallen into the pattern of late night eating, which I know so many people struggle with. And I know that's just a setting issue for most people. Like you're so used to habitually getting the ice cream out of their fridge at, when you're sitting and watching TV. Try and change up your environment, maybe. First of all, get rid of the ice cream if you just can't say no. But, maybe go, somewhere else in your house or do something different to kind of change up that routine. Replace it with, I know it's not quite the same to have a hot cup of tea, but something like that, yeah, not quite the same. And I totally get that. But I always do what I do. And this is where everybody, again, has something different that works for them. Because I'm a sweet tooth, I always eat dinner. And then right immediately after dinner, I have some super dark chocolate. So I feel like I love chocolate. It's 85%, 88% is the brand I use right now. And I feel like it satiates my sweet tooth enough where that is the end of my meal. And I either have tea or nothing. And I turn off the lights, close the kitchen. That's it.
I'm in a tricky spot in that I'm not a late night snacker. I don't go back after dinner, but I have kids in sports. And so our dinner is not at 6 o'clock.
Yeah. And I had those days too. days too.
So then I'm having dinner at maybe 7:30. And then I get up and I like to eat before I work out. I might just have a smoothie or something, but I go to 7 a.m. gym. So I'm not even getting 12 hours. Which sometimes if we're just lifting, then I don't need a smoothie beforehand. But if we're doing something that is, with cardio and lifting, I eat before I go. And so I'm like, you don't even make it 10 hours.
Well, and that might work for you. I'm not saying that, everyone again is different. I found I usually go to a 7 a.m. class every morning, which is my routine right now. And I can't eat usually before, but I'm only working out for 45 minutes typically. But tomorrow I'll go to my 7 a.m. and then I actually go to play tennis. So I will eat earlier tomorrow because I don't want to go 3 hours without eating something. So again, I'm not dogmatic about it. I'm listening to my body and I know that I need fuel for certain things. But I do think that hormonally, it kind of depends where you're at. Also, if you struggle with any kind of cortisol, thyroid, imbalances, which many women do, sometimes you should not be fasting too much because it's a stressor for your body. So your body can perceive it as a stress and your cortisol levels can go up a little bit higher too. So again, the answer is probably clear as mud right there for some people. But my advice would be to try and go at least 12 hours. And if you can, I know the kids in sports things, that's a time in your life, right? And you just, it is what it is. It is what it is. And I went through that and now I'm the other side. I have one kid, she drives, one kid at home, the other two are out of the house. And I can kind of do whatever I want when I want for the most part. So I set my days up where I'm eating at 6 and, then I eat after my workout. So it works for me. But again, certain days I'll be hungrier and I'll change that and that's okay.
Right. I feel like I cheated a little bit by having you on and asking all my personal nutrition.
That's what it's all about. That's what it's all about.
You do work with individuals too, right?
I no longer do actually. So I did for the first 6 years of my practice and I worked one-on-one and I love that. During COVID, it kind of killed me because I was on Zoom way too many hours. And so now I just do group, corporate, and presentations and retreats for companies and things like that. So
perfect. Well, I will look forward to the detox in May. That sounds fun and like a perfect, pre-summer reset.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what it's about. And I do, even though I'm not seeing one-on-one, I try and post all the time of health tips, those kind of things. I have a website where I got to get better about putting recipes up. I haven't recently, but I do post a lot of recipes and just health tips and blogs on health.
Yes, and I will link all of those things in your Instagram in the show notes, as well as a link to the new book.
Oh,
and
thank you.
I thank you so much for your time and sharing all of your knowledge so that I don't have to go and read.
Go PubMed. Yes. It is tricky to read some of those things for sure. Yeah. So, thank you, Susan. Thanks for having me.
First.